There was a time when Britain built more than just motor cars. We built rolling monuments to our own supremacy. To sit inside a Daimler or a Rover in the early 1960s was to inhale the very scent of empire. The intoxicating perfume of hot engine oil, mingling with hand-stitched bridge of weir leather and rich walnut veneer. When you closed the heavy steel door of a Jaguar, it shut with the definitive, satisfying thud of a nation that knew exactly who it was and exactly how good it was. Our engineering commanded respect from prime ministers to international royalty. We were the envy of the industrialized world, and then we threw it all away. In less than a decade, the unquestioned pride of British engineering was violently transformed into a global punchline. This isn't a story of bad luck or the inevitable shift of foreign markets. This is the story of an industrial suicide. It is the tragedy of a Frankenstein's monster of a corporation, stitched together by arrogant politicians, run by hopelessly incompetent executives, and bled dry by militant unions. This is the collapse of British Leyland. It began, as all great disasters do, with the hubris of politicians. 1968. The Labour government, terrified of the American titans Ford and General Motors, decided Britain needed a national champion. Politicians like Tony Benn orchestrated a forced marriage between two fundamentally incompatible entities. On one side, British Motor Holdings. They were huge, but they were dying donkeys, churning out desperately obsolete vehicles like the Morris Minor. On the other side, Leyland Motors. Smaller, profitable, but deeply arrogant. Together, they formed British Leyland. At the helm was Lord Donald Stokes, a brilliant truck salesman, perhaps, but a man entirely unqualified to integrate a sprawling empire of 48 warring factories. Instead of rolling up his sleeves and making the brutal cuts required to survive, Stokes retreated. He built a 14-story ivory tower in Marylebone, London, safely insulated from the grease, the grime, and the grim reality of the factory floors. And, in his absence, a vicious civil war broke out. Instead of uniting against the Americans, the historic British marquis turned their guns on each other. It was an absurd, relentless internal cannibalization. Rover and Triumph refused to share components. They treated their divisions like personal medieval fiefdoms. When Triumph designed the new Stag sports car, they desperately needed a V8 engine. Rover already possessed one of the finest, most reliable V8s in the world, but out of sheer tribal spite, Triumph engineers refused to use it. Instead, they bolted two slant-4 engines together to create their own. It was a catastrophic piece of engineering. They put the water pump too high. The single timing chains stretched. The engines overheated and literally ripped themselves to shreds. It was millions of pounds of capital set on fire for the sake of middle management ego. But the boardroom bickering was nothing compared to the sheer embarrassment of what was actually rolling off the assembly lines. By the mid-1970s, British Leyland had entered the era of the joke, and the ultimate punchline was the Austin Allegro. Management demanded a modern car, but forced engineers to cram massive, obsolete heaters and tall engines under the hood. The result was a swollen, disproportionate toad of a vehicle. They fitted it with seats so thick you couldn't move your legs, and then, in a stroke of absolute madness, gave it a square steering wheel. They called it quartic. The world called it a laughing stock. To buy a British Leyland car in the 70s was to invite humiliation into your life. Imagine a freezing, rain-lashed night on the M1 motorway. You are broken down on the hard shoulder in a brand new Morris Marina. The Lucas Electrics have fried. The interior smells of cheap, damp adhesive. And your windshield wipers, which the factory workers inexplicably installed backward, have just ripped themselves clean off in the wind. Quality control was a myth. Go to a dealership and look at the flagship Rover SD1. The panel gaps were so violently asymmetrical you could fit your entire hand through the steelwork. At the factories, security guards watched as unpainted body shells were left outside in the Birmingham rain for months. They turned bright red with rust before being casually dragged inside, painted over, and sold to a public that was rapidly losing its patience. But the worst damage wasn't done by the executives in London or the engineers in the design studios. It was done on the factory floor. Welcome to Longbridge, the beating heart of British Leyland, hijacked by militant unionists. At the centre of the chaos was a communist convener named Derek Robinson. The press called him Red Robo. Under his watch, the unions weaponized the assembly line. In just 33 months, Robinson orchestrated an incomprehensible 523 separate strikes. Listen. Listen to the sound of a dying industry. It is the deafening, terrifying silence of a paralyzed factory. No stamping presses, no drills, just silent assembly lines, hemorrhaging millions of pounds a day. They struck over everything. In one breathtaking display of petty sabotage, 100 paint sprayers walked out simply because management tried to stagger the times of their afternoon tea breaks. A 10-day strike, £10 million lost, cars left rotting on the line, over a cup of tea. It was madness. MI5 agents were literally sent into the factories to spy on the unions, bribing officials with fish suppers, desperate to stop the bleeding. But the wound was fatal. By 1975, the money was gone. The government had to step in, nationalising the corpse of British Leyland at a cost of billions to the British taxpayer, just to prevent total economic collapse. But you cannot legislate pride back into existence. Over the coming decades, the empire was carved up. The factories were shuttered, bulldozed, and sold for scrap. The historic badges, Rover, MG, Jaguar, were auctioned off to foreign buyers. Today, the vast halls of Longbridge are gone. The men who fought over tea breaks are gone. The executives in their Marylebone Tower are gone. What remains is a profound, melancholic grief. We did not lose our motor industry to superior engineering from abroad. We tore it apart from the inside out. We took a legacy built on craftsmanship, on leather and oil and global prestige, and we ground it into the rust.